Welcome to the webcast. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us. We'll be underway in just a moment. Thanks again for joining us on this beautiful sunny afternoon. Thanks again for joining us. We'll get started in just a moment. Good afternoon and welcome to our webcast, Reimagining Work, Defining a Safe and Productive Environment in the New Era. For those of you who I've not met, I'm Dan Meyer, publisher of BizTimes Media. Thank you for attending today's webcast, which is presented by Creative Business Interiors and Reinhard Berner Van Buren and brought to you by BT360 Content Solutions, the marketing storytelling arm of BizTimes Media. The city announced today it's easing COVID restrictions on June 15th. The Brewers and Bucks are increasing their seating limits to 50%. There's much to celebrate after a very difficult 14 months. With getting back to the office more of a reality every day, business leaders need to consider what that means for their company. What will business as usual look like post-pandemic? How will employees work and where? How will employers establish an actual plan to accommodate all forms of work in this new era? From productivity to innovation to creativity and collaboration, plus legal issues, there are good reasons to implement proactive strategies right now to prepare for what's next. Our presenters will provide you with some clarity to these issues. They will also cover national data on 5 major business drivers and how they shape the future of the work model, topics your business will need to actualize hybrid work benefits, planning logistics and process to bring people back safely, legal issues that may arise with remote and/or hybrid work, and how vaccinations impact bringing employees back to work. You'll meet our presenters in a moment. They are Rebecca Brown, Vice President with Creative Business Interiors, and Brittany Lopez-Nalet, shareholder with Reinhard Berner Van Buren. The slide deck for our program is available now if you want to take notes and follow along. You'll find the link in the chat button on your screen. It'll also be accessible after the program on our website. At the conclusion, you will also find an attendee survey. We would appreciate it if you'd fill it out to help us plan for future webcasts. We just celebrated our 25th year as an independent family-owned business, and BizTimes Media is the only locally owned business media company in the region, and it wouldn't be possible without your support. Whether it's attending events like this, print or digital advertising, event sponsorships, or BizTimes Media's BT360 content solutions, I guarantee that we'll work hard every day to earn your business, to help you grow your business through our custom and integrated marketing programs. If you're interested, please contact our sales director, Linda Crawford. In addition, our award-winning editorial team is always looking for story ideas, especially if your business is expanding or moving, or you're buying another business, or if you have any other news, operational insights, or other information you'd like to share. Please let us know so that we can help you tell your story. And last year, we launched our Insider Subscriber Program. For the equivalent of $8 a month, you can be an insider and receive several insider benefits, including access to all the content produced by our editorial team. It's also your opportunity to support local journalism. Before I introduce the panelists, I want to mention that today's webcast is being recorded and will be available on demand, along with the slide deck on our website by tomorrow morning, as well as in the chat. As I mentioned earlier, the slide deck is available, and if you want to take notes, please follow along and do so. So now on to the presenters. They include Rebecca Brown, Vice President with Creative Business Interiors. Creative Business Interiors specializes in designing, building, and furnishing commercial spaces. Welcome, Becky.
Thank you, Dan, for the intro, and to BizTimes for making this opportunity available.
Looking forward to your presentation. Following Becky is Brittany Lopez-Naled. Brittany is shareholder with Reinhardt Berner Van Buren. Reinhardt is a full-service, business-oriented law firm based in Milwaukee, serving clients throughout the United States. Welcome, Brittany.
Thanks, Dan. It's great to be here. Looking forward to our discussion today.
Great to have you. So following the presentations, our intent is to leave time for Q&A. So please remember to submit your questions you have by using the Q&A feature on your screen. We did receive a number of questions in the pre-registration, so we'll get to that as soon as that occurs after the presentations. So let's move on to the presentations. Becky, I'll turn it over to you. Becky?
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Dan. Dan mentioned in our intro about Creative what we do, but I'd love to say one of the things that I really like about working at Creative is our strategic conversations we get to have with business leaders that are interested in looking forward to creating environments that evoke positive experiences. And I know coming out of this pandemic, we can all use some positivity. So today we're going to talk about, next slide, please, a research study. And I'm going to take you on an adventure. It's going to be a two-part adventure today. Part one, we're going to look at the research called What's Up Remote. So unlike other research you may have seen over the last 14 months, and that's been interesting and left you thinking, okay, that's great, but now what? I am going to take you on to a part two and kind of give you a preview into how this might work and apply to your business through a playbook called Hello Hybrid. Next slide, please. So I'm going to jump right in. The What's Up Remote research set out to understand this one word, productivity. What activities lead to productivity, and how is productivity really perceived? To give context around What's Up Remote, this research was done late in the year of 2020. Employees were now well underway in their new routines of their remote working environment, and all the buzz was about productivity. How much more productive I am at home, how much more work I get done, et cetera, et cetera. So the employee's perception of productivity against its importance in their day was much closer met when they were working at home. Next slide, please. In addition to understanding and measuring for productivity, Doris, the national research firm conducting the research, thought, well, we know there's more to business than just individual productivity. So they also studied these 5 business drivers: collaboration, creativity, innovation, strategy, and of course, productivity. So while employees may find that they are more productive while working from home, they may be lacking in the other areas of this system. And the overall system, all of these business drivers are largely important to organizations because it's what makes each of them uniquely them. The way your leadership team strategizes and innovates, the way your individual contributors collaborate and create, that makes it special to your organization. Next slide, please. What the research found is that this system works starting at the base of a pyramid, with each section building off of the next. In this system, innovation and creativity are foundational to our organization. They are the fundamentals of the organization. These are needed to inspire and manifest energy needed for collaboration and strategy. Collaboration and strategy are generators. These move a business forward and are future and growth focused. They are necessary to create tasks for individuals to be productive. I'm going to repeat that. Collaboration and strategy are necessary to create tasks for individuals to be productive. Get to the top, productivity drives movement for an organization. It can stabilize and maintain, but it doesn't necessarily generate or innovate. An individual can be productive, but needs team strategy and collaboration to generate new tasks. So you can work up the pyramid, but you can't work back down the pyramid. Next slide, please. Participants were asked to reflect on their work environments as it pertained to these 5 drivers, and thinking about their past work environment, their present work environment, and what their future work environment might hold. And we're going to hone in specifically on 2 of these drivers. The first is collaboration, and that's illustrated in the top line in a teal color. When reflecting on past work environments, participants said, I was highly collaborative. I mean, I'm almost at a 10. My environment supported me so well. Today, in the present, I'm so collaborative. And you can see that driver take a bit of a nosedive as everybody moved to remote working. They were all largely optimistic in that the future holds a more effective collaborative environment, whatever that might look like. The other driver we're going to look at is innovation, and that is the orange line on the very bottom. In the past, it ranked the lowest, so people weren't feeling that they were as innovative. In the present, you can see it moved up a tick, and in the future, they're even more innovative. And I want to pause on the present. Again, this was in the time of remote work, end of the year. By now, we had all mastered how to use Zoom. We were now up on Teams using instant messaging. We were conducting web conferences. These are all tools that existed to us before, but we weren't really capitalizing on them. So in some ways, in the present, we were seeing that participants were feeling much more innovative about their own daily process. Next slide, please. We're going to take a deeper dive at each of these drivers. And the first at the bottom of the pyramid is creativity. And I love this one. You'll see next to the word creativity is the word energy. There were words that came up through the research that remained synonymous with each of the drivers. And when participants were asked to quantify the number of colleagues in a collaborative environment that they worked at previously in an office space, as compared to their home office, you will see in the bar graph that participants cited maybe having collaborative engagements with colleagues, 20 different colleagues in a day, versus a mere 5 while at home. I love this because I'm an energy-driven person. And so my creativity and my ability to contribute to my team really comes through energy. Next slide, please. Innovation. So innovation and creativity are very closely related, and in some ways was hard for participants to define. But really, when we're innovating, the word communication becomes synonymous. And the reason being is that in order to innovate, we need to be able to hear all voices, gather all perspectives from interdepartmental, cross-learning, all kinds of teams. In order to truly be innovative, we're searching for the things that we've not heard before. And so communication becomes synonymous with innovation. And as we look at the chart, when asked about how important innovation is to your job function against how you're performing, whether at home or in the office, you could see that participants were feeling that their performance was not living up to the importance. Next slide, please. On to strategy. The word synonymous with strategy was effort. Strategic collaboration is usually always intentional. And it requires effort because it's usually more than one person. It's a scheduled activity. There's intention set around why you're being strategic with a future growth-minded focus. Of the participants, there were individual contributors, management, and leadership. And you see from the graph that management and leadership ranked strategic conversations as a higher activity rate for them. So moving forward, thinking about the availability of your management and leadership team to have strategic conversations will become important. Next slide, please. On to collaboration. Collaboration requires accessibility to people. Now, we all know the old adage about water cooler talk and is that healthy or not? But in the reality is, when we're in a physical environment together, the ability to have an impromptu encounter, spurring a collaborative moment or conversation is much more tangible and available to have. And one of the bullet points here I love to hone in on is the pre-meeting meeting or the post-meeting meeting. So how many times you're queuing up to get into the room while the other group moves out and you say, oh man, I'm so happy you're here. I wanted to ask you this really quick question before we moved in to the meeting. What do you think about fill in the blank? And in that moment, because you had accessibility to a colleague or a coworker, you were able to have a collaborative moment. Now, impromptu encounters are also happening virtually, which kind of seems a little like, oh, is that even really happening? I don't know. But really, the quantitative data from the research shows that it is happening, just much differently. Next slide, please. So impromptu encounters can still happen virtually. What we've learned is that we're utilizing different modes of communicating and creating accessibility for collaboration. Those modes, we've always had email, but now more instant messaging, relying on a phone call, or web conferencing. And in the circle graphs, you see in an impromptu conversation, we've just made these new norms around reaching people and how to collaborate with them in a virtual environment, relying heavily on email or phone calls, followed by instant messaging and then web conferencing. Impromptu encounters that are more scheduled to be able to be, collaborative encounters that are more scheduled are occurring through web conferencing. But the key here is figuring out the how and the when we're accessible and the length of collaboration that we need to have with our team members. Next slide, please. So now we're at the top of the pyramid with productivity. And along with productivity is responsibility. And I think that kind of goes like an obvious, right? Like if I have my own mind share that I need to put towards my work, I'm solely responsible for that. If I'm working with a team and we've collaborated and I walk away with lots of tasks and things that I need to get done, I'm responsible to report back to my team to keep forward momentum. So what's interesting about productivity in the remote work environment, one, it was providing us with more opportunity to have focused heads down time, but largely the employees are able to turn on and off when they have collaborative moments, as well as turn on and off when they have productive moments. So I think without saying, we know that productivity has increased in the remote work environment. So what's up? What's the summary? Next slide, please. And next slide. I'm going to take you through a few scenarios that kind of put you at home, work, and a future potential hybrid model. Now, of course, these are all based on a few assumptions, right? We're post-COVID, our culture is healthy, our people are happy, communication's flowing. But what I think we really need to know is that each organization needs to figure out what this looks like for them. And when we move on to the next slide, the context around these graphs, you'll see office, home, and hybrid makes the assumption that nothing has changed. You've made no amendments to the way that your workflow is happening, and you're doing these in totality. So let's start with the office. So let's assume everybody's back in the office. You've decided that your work mode or your work type just demands everybody's together. You'll see here the drivers of creativity and collaboration will rank really high. We have over time figured how to create environments that support collaboration and create energy, as well as strategy and collaboration are rather well supported in the workplace. We know how to do this. We've been doing this for some time. But productivity takes a dip, right? Which is why we've gotten the refresh of, if you move to the home environment on the center graph, you see productivity has a big spike for the reasons we just talked about. But creativity and strategic conversations are lacking. And innovation and collaboration is just hanging out in the middle. So as we move on to hybrid, now I want you to remember, like, this is assuming we're just going to hit a hybrid. People are going to be at home, people are going to be in. We've made no adjustments to accommodate new work styles, new technologies, etc. You can see everything kind of evens out. And sadly, creativity and strategy conversations bottom out. So that's where we see the opportunity to improve our environments in a hybrid work mode. Next slide. So, hello hybrid, ready or not, here we are. Next slide, please. I'm going to take you through some foundational elements that each organization needs to consider for themselves in order to define success in a future new era of hybrid work. And it starts with trust and accountability. If a core team can define for their organization and have a sound foundation of trust, accountability, psychological safety, culture, and equity in the workplace, and they take these drivers and understand what works for their business moving forward, it will help them answer the question, how hybrid can my organization be? Next slide, please. We then move on to the when, who, and where. And this is where this can be tedious, and this is where the rubber meets the road. But first, we need to identify for our organization, when are people expected to work? And Brittany, I know in her talk, we'll talk a little bit about different time zones. Are people somewhere else? Do we need to accommodate longer work days? What works for your business? So knowing the when and the who has flexibility to choose where they're working based on their job function, and the where people can work, which doesn't, the where in a hybrid model doesn't necessarily assume they're working from home. It could be a coffee shop, it could be a library, it could be somewhere else. If you can identify those three things and be a little tedious about it, it will start to inform the decisions you'll make in a hybrid mode. Collaboration and availability. I think, it was clear in the graphs. You see, this is where we might need to focus some time. How difficult will it be for people to collaborate if people are working in different places at different times? And what resources do we need to provide to ease that transition? Next slide. So, I mean, living through a pandemic, it became really obvious that IT and HR they have to, they're like the backbone of our businesses, right? And their ability to stay adaptable and accommodate and really be thoughtful about how we can support a hybrid work, their efforts are going to be very instrumental in defining this moving forward. And that goes everything, running through your business on how you onboard and train. Will employees that are remote have the same advancements and growth available in their environments? And key here is developing an action plan and being consistent about how and when you communicate, as well as knowing that you may need to adjust. Maybe we need to pilot, try it, adjust it, come back to it, revisit, take temperature, do surveys, et cetera. And I know Brittany will talk a bit about communication plan and the importance in her speak to. Next slide, please. AV and workplace setup and facilities and resources go a little hand in hand. The AV and workplace setup is really important. If I'm not only from my own workers inside and the tools that I'm giving them in a work environment, whether it's at home or in the office, but the client experience. What are they seeing when they see my team members on a video call? Do we have the right branding? Does it portray a great experience from the sound and the way that they're encountering our services? So addressing those needs and setting parameters around maybe even where visual presentations can occur in an office it will be largely important. And then that goes with facilities and resources. Without knowing all of the things we just talked about, without the business taking the time to be very strategic on the who's, the whens, and the hows, we won't really know how to adjust a physical workspace to meet your needs, but to know that changes might need to happen. And that could be for experience, it could be for safety. If we have guests in our space, how will we address amenities? And being able to make sure that our team members know who to contact and how to navigate through a new facility and work environment. Next slide, please. So what's next? Just left implementation. Every organization has its own unique factors that will determine the viability of a hybrid environment in their workplace. Using the topics we just discussed, it can give you a little guideline on the things that you're going to need to think about and how to create a personalized and actionable game plan for implementing hybrid work. And on to Brittany.
Thank you very much, Becky. That was great. I look forward to some questions and to dig a little deeper into some of those issues. Before I turn it over to Brittany with Reinhardt, I want to remind you to send in your questions. I see that we have one. We've got several others that were sent in prior to the program using the Q&A feature on the screen. And that's where you also find the link to the slide deck, which is on the chat feature. So as more and more companies are having their employees come back to their office or are starting to put a plan in place, there are a number of important legal issues for us to know regarding anti-discrimination laws and remote workers, mandatory versus voluntary vaccines, safe work environments, to name a few. It seems like a landmine. So to help us understand how to mitigate some of these risks for employers, I'd like to turn it over to Brittany Lopez-Naled with Reinhardt. Brittany.
Thanks, Dan. It's great to be here today. I'll start off by saying that normally no one wants to go on an adventure with their employment and OSHA lawyer, but hopefully this will still be interesting to you about what we are talking about. So if we want to jump to the first slide, we're going to be a field of landmines. We are going to be talking about when you go back post-pandemic, whether that's, in 2 weeks from now, if it's in 3-4 months from now, what kind of questions do we need to be looking at? So once you've gone through the analysis that Becky has talked about, what is the best plan for your workplace, whether it's in-person, remote, or hybrid, then what are the potential legal risks associated with that? So obviously planning is critical. That will help you minimize risk and make things smooth. We want to set a date to come back. And so how do we make that date work? The biggest question, and it's usually the first question, is, can we make people go back to the office? And generally the answer to that question is going to be yes. So, when you're thinking about that, once you've decided that returning in person is appropriate and the best solution for your office, you might still need to consider some accommodations. So just because you say we're returning to work doesn't necessarily mean every single individual will return to the office place. And, consider, do you need to stagger it? Should it be rolling? Are we going to have some COVID-related childcare issues still this summer that impact your employees? And if you can gauge how that's going to impact your culture, are people looking for some flexibility, which might lead towards hybrid? Or honestly, is productivity just way down and your business is really collaborative and you need everybody back in? So those are kind of some of the initial questions. And now we'll talk about some of the specific risks to be on the lookout for. So let's jump to the next slide. A big issue is accommodations for remote workers. And this will affect you in various scenarios of return to work. So the remote workers that you have now or you plan to make permanent are still covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act, Wisconsin Fair Employment Act, and other anti-discrimination laws, just as they do with in-person workers. So you need to make sure you're assessing requests for accommodation from those workers. There may be workers that previously didn't need an accommodation in person, but now are requesting one at home, whether it's because a condition has arisen or they simply need this to complete their job. So you would assess those as you would any accommodation, going through the interactive process with those employees. And that's one thing to remember. You know, we are in a strange situation. We've been in this for a long time, but those kind of general employment principles are still there about how you deal with your employees. We just might see a slight twist on some of them. You might also have requests for accommodation when you are returning employees to the workplace. There may be requests that people remain remote because of potential disability or medical issues. And so you'll want to go through the interactive process on those also. Finally, as you're coming back into the workplace, you may have individuals that need accommodations or are renewing accommodation requests. And one way to kind of help with that and to make the transition smooth is to let your workforce know ahead of time that you're planning to, bring some or all individuals back to the workplace, and inviting them to submit any requests for accommodation ahead of time so that those can be processed. You're not under the gun to process them, and you have time to work through that process and don't delay getting people back to work. One issue, as I know Becky mentioned, we have amazing HR teams and office, staff at their homes who have been just digging in throughout the pandemic. And so making sure that those people have what they need to maintain confidentiality of medical information, that they have what they need to make sure that we are keeping everything we need from a documentation standpoint. So if you've got handwritten notes, do you have a way to scan those in so we're saving them? Do you have a way to scan in any documents that you have in hard copy? So make sure that our documentation and our obligations under confidentiality are still being complied with, and obviously confidentiality generally for remote workers, making sure, from cybersecurity and data privacy and protecting your proprietary information, that you are on top of that. And that may require updating your confidentiality agreements with employees, because sometimes those would say you can't have this information outside of the workplace. And now, yes, you might have it at home because that is your workplace, but then you have separate obligations to protect that information so that that information remains protected if it needs to be in court. Let's jump to the next slide. Another big issue with remote work is that employees have been able to relocate. So, maybe somebody is working in Florida and, every conference call they are out in the sunshine while we are here in the very fickle weather. You got to know where your employees are working, and your handbook may require them to update you on their address, but that may have slipped people's minds. So make sure that you know where all of your employees are performing work, because you may be unknowingly subjecting your workplace, your entity, to differing legal obligations and potentially much more expansive legal obligations. And you need to be able to assess whether you're willing to do that. So these kind of differing obligations include everything from states that have greater employee workplace protections that may require you to do additional training, such as prevention of sexual harassment training is mandated in certain states. There are requirements of additional paid or unpaid leave, more expansive discrimination provisions. And then another big issue is making sure your employees are being paid properly under federal and state wage laws. So if your employees are working on a schedule, do you ensure that they are sticking to that schedule? And if they are working outside that schedule, are they tracking it so that they can be paid for that work? That is something that should be in an updated remote work policy. That kind of touches on the time zone issue that Becky mentioned. Are we going to be staggering certain work schedules because people are in very different time zones now? So seeing how that is going to work is something you just want to be on top of. Know where everybody is so you can assess if you're willing to subject yourself potentially to those obligations. One final issue that also arises is if you're in a new state, there could be tax obligations in that state. There could be state unemployment taxes and also workers' compensation. So workers' compensation is still going to apply to your remote employees. And that's a big reason why you want to know what their schedule is. Obviously, workers' compensation will apply to them when they're on duty, but if they are off duty, then they're kind of just living their normal life, and that's their personal time. So making sure that you have a clear distinction, even for employees who are salaried and not necessarily normally tracking all of their hours, they should have a schedule when they're working. So let's jump to the next slide, which is vaccinations in the workplace. So we're bringing people back. Obviously, we are thinking about how vaccinations are impacting our ability to do that and employee safety. Mandatory versus voluntary vaccination programs. It can be a little bit of a, another thing that you need to assess internally, what makes the most sense for you. Mandatory vaccination programs are legal. They're, again, you have to address medical and religious accommodations. So they do involve some risk of liability if you are not appropriately handling those requests for accommodation. And you should assess, do we need it? Is our workplace of a risk level that warrants mandating vaccines? And how is that going to impact the culture of our workplace? If we have a large percentage of employees that are not eligible for an accommodation but won't get the vaccine, can we operate with those percentage of people excluded from the workplace? One thing that is unfortunately a little bit gray is how can we incentivize employees to get the vaccine? We had some guidance that was rescinded. EEOC has promised that we're going to get some soon, but soon is the key word there. The most low risk way of incentivizing is to provide education and encouragement. So encouragement to say, we're supporting you to get a vaccine. We will help you find either on-site or off-site clinics. We may help you schedule those appointments. Here is accurate and reliable information on the vaccine, and including, as we're getting closer to getting full authorization for the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, providing that information once that comes out, making sure employees who may have had some hesitancy are aware once it is fully approved. As you get into more valuable incentives, you do start to increase your risk. Normally kind of de minimis incentives are going to be okay, like water bottles, nominal value gift cards. But if you get into some entities have done, $100, $200, and those you're going to start having to also assess accommodations. So if you have employees that for a medical reason can't get a vaccine, how can they be eligible for that incentive? And it may be a COVID-19, safety and mitigation course or something that would be reasonable for them to then be eligible for that to avoid discrimination. I think I saw a question pop up about proof of vaccine. That is a daily question that we are getting. And so you can request that employees provide a proof of vaccine. I know employers have gone different ways about whether they want to know their vaccination rates and do so anonymously or not, but you are entitled to request that proof of vaccination. You just want to be careful that you don't get more than you actually are looking for. So you don't want to know if someone didn't get it, why they didn't get it, because that could lead you to getting confidential medical information that you then need to have a business necessity to have. So you want to do it with yes or no questions. You can find out if people have one or both of their vaccines, if they are planning to get one, yes or no, and if they, if you're looking at a date to come back, like maybe July 15th, will you be fully vaccinated by July 15th? Yes or no. And if you do this via an online survey, don't have a comment box, because you don't want someone to type in, I'm not getting the vaccine because I am pregnant. You weren't looking to get that information. So let's make sure we don't accidentally get it. So let's go to the next slide. And the next slide is touching on bringing people back into the workplace. So for a lot of you, you've got at least some employees back, and this may be old hat, but if you have been remote and you're looking at coming back this summer, you still want to make sure that your workplace is a safe place for employees, and you are doing what you need to do to reduce the risk of exposure to COVID-19 in the workplace. So there are, unfortunately, this is one of those things that you just have to kind of stay on top of. You've got federal, state, and local entities all kind of giving you guidance. It's generally pretty consistent, but it moves quickly. So you have the CDC. OSHA kind of tends to mirror the CDC for most things. If you're here in Wisconsin, Wisconsin Department of Health Services and your local health departments. We know in Wisconsin, we've seen some changes. We've seen the state mask mandate being struck down. And so now you kind of have a patchwork that you need to stay on top of, whether your county or, city or town has a mandate. And even the CDC, as vaccination rates have increased, they have changed some of their restrictions, particularly on fully vaccinated individuals. So those individuals may not have to quarantine if they are asymptomatic. They have less restrictions in terms of travel, what they need to do pre and post travel. And so I anticipate that those CDC guidelines will continue to change. I know that they're studying forward transmission or vaccinated people's ability to spread COVID-19. And hopefully if that comes back that, that is not possible, we will really see things lifted. But you're just going to want to kind of monitor that. The other big, where the liability really comes in is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. So you have an obligation to provide a safe workplace to your employees, which includes reducing exposure to COVID-19, which is a known hazard. So there is the potential for an emergency temporary standard, which would be binding regulations and some indication that maybe they would have healthcare standards and then kind of everybody else. But that is currently in the Office of Management and Budget. And so it could be a couple of weeks before we hear about that, or potentially never. I mean, the administration may say it is not such an imminent risk that we need a binding standard, but we still do have some guidance from OSHA in the interim. We have it's called Safe Work Guidance. And so it provides like 20 suggestions for things that you should at least be considering within your workplace. And I think it's a really great place to start, just to kind of checklist, like, are we doing this stuff? So did we do a hazard assessment? Where are the risky areas within our workplace where employees are at highest risk? Do we have a bottleneck at time machines, in break rooms? Do we have people working very closely together for long periods of time? So doing that hazard assessment at the outset. And then, do we have someone that's in charge of COVID-19? Who is keeping on top of this? Who can employees go to with questions and suggestions? Some of the kind of standard protections are included. So face masks, social distancing, ventilation, increased cleaning, educating and training workers. And another one is making sure you are investigating cases of COVID-19 of your employees. Are they work related or not? Do we need to be reporting them? And OSHA is kind of starting to step up their inspections, both with, the new administration and also what they have is now a national emphasis program. So it's not just healthcare providers, don't get comfortable because you are outside the healthcare route. They are looking at any public facing entity. So we've got, a lot of restaurants, we've got grocery stores. There was a really large citation at a tax preparation entity in Massachusetts, although that was a little bit more egregious. They were prohibiting masks. They weren't just saying like, yeah, we're a little lax on it. They were saying don't wear them. So don't go that route. And why don't I jump to the last slide, which is kind of the key takeaways. I mean, unfortunately, I could probably talk to you about OSHA for an hour and we don't need to go that route. But the last slide basically just has some big picture recommendations. Again, planning is key to all of this. It's how you're going to kind of see some of these legal risks ahead of time. Critically assess the pros and cons for your workplace. It's not a one size fits all thing, whether you come back staggered or all at once. These are all questions that you just really want to think long and hard about. And if it's appropriate, communicate with your employees. Let them know what you're thinking, get feedback. It really could surprise you. I know a lot of people did enjoy remote work, but we're also getting some people are getting very tired of it. I'm in the workplace because it's nice to be here and not at my dining room table anymore. Communicate with employees ahead of time if it's appropriate, but if not, give them some lead time. Don't spring this on them. Give them time to, talk to you about their concerns, talk to you about accommodations. That's how you're going to reduce people calling the health department and calling OSHA, is if they know that you are putting in critical thinking about their safety, they're going to feel more comfortable about that. And finally, policies and forms, make sure that they are being updated to reflect your new environment. So comprehensive remote work policies, written COVID-19 preparedness plan, like it's not required, but I think it's a really good thing to have to share with employees and to share if you need to with OSHA. And then finally, just a comprehensive return to work plan, even if it's everybody's coming back in person, let's just be very clear about what we're doing. So that is all I have for right now.
Thank you, Brittany. Thank you very much. I want to thank Amy Linder from United Way for correcting me. That's a massive field of landmines. I want to just stick with that. We do have a number of questions, so the rest of the time we'll field those questions. You talked about a hazard assessment and levels of tasks that you're going to do to make sure people are safe when they come back. At what point are you vulnerable for, well, you didn't do enough, or you're not doing enough, I'm not coming back, or is that an individual case-by-case situation, or are there certain rules that you need to follow? I think you might have alluded to that with OSHA, but are those available, and what can companies do now to say, okay, we have a hand sanitizer at every table, and we're wiping down the refrigerator 3 times a day? I mean, at what point is enough?
Yeah, and that's kind of the difficult question without an emergency temporary standard, is you are kind of having to do some of that legwork on your own. There are a lot of really great resources. The Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation has a series of they're kind of like brochures. They're, maybe 8 to 10 pages for various industries, kind of pointing to industry specific things that you should be looking out for. So looking at a number of those and you're kind of Frankensteining a program together. But I would definitely start by looking at all of those things. And that's, to say, did we do enough? That's where you say we looked at the guidance, we're complying with it. And if we're choosing specifically not to comply with certain guidance, we've done A, B, and C to minimize any risk that might come from that, from ignoring that.
Okay. Can you ask a job applicant if they're vaccinated?
Yes, you can. And I think it's fair if you are requiring vaccination as, a condition of employment, you want to be upfront with that. And,
Sure.
and I think if you are implementing that on someone who's already accepted, give them the opportunity to withdraw their acceptance if they have now decided they are unwilling or unable to fill that condition of employment.
Mm-hmm. Some of the other questions, can we start relaxing CDC protocols such as wearing a mask?
So that is one that is literally being updated right now. The CDC has just come out and said vaccinated people can go maskless in most places. And they're saying you still need to file guidance at your workplace and local businesses. So there is still some question, though, how that is going to interact with OSHA. And some of this may depend on your specific workplace. I had been prepared with one answer to that question, and now as I'm literally seeing it typed right now, I'm feeling back from it a little bit. But again, this is where you've got to say that, we've got to keep on top of this and assess, does it make sense? So you may see local mask mandates changing now that we have this CDC guidance also. I know the city of Milwaukee has indicated that they're making changes, but going to continue to require them indoors. This may kind of change some of that for them too. But in terms of relaxing from the CDC guidance, I would tend to still stick with it, because obviously the CDC is frequently updating as the studies are showing, how the vaccination is impacting spread.
Interesting. So I want to get into this topic that'll involve both of you. It's this hybrid work environment, and it's which employees don't want to come back to the office. Either they just don't want to, they feel like they're more productive and they do better work remotely or at home. And the balance between that, okay, well, we're gonna have a hybrid environment, and for each company that could be different. It could be 1, 2, 3, 4 days a week, or every other week, or the team A comes in Monday through Wednesday and the BT comes in Thursday and Friday. There's multiple parts to this question. Becky, what are you seeing with your customers in terms of space planning? We've got some real estate developers, real estate folks in the audience that own buildings and are developing buildings, and we have certainly employers that are having leases come due at some point. How is that all working with this hybrid space, and how do you start to implement a plan? And then back to you, Brittany, in terms of the discriminations, like, well, do you have the sales team come in one time? Do you do a hybrid by department, or by those tasks of collaboration and task oriented and strategy? Can you talk a little bit more about that? I think that was slide 15 as well. Mary,
yeah, 15, or I was going to say, Mary, if you want to hop back to slide 13 even, I just to hit home the idea that productivity is just one piece, right? And so even though that worker might be really productive on their own tasks, if we're not facilitating a way for them to be collaborative and strategic with other team members, we're really breaking down the system of an organization. So organizationally, the challenge does come in for management and leaders to be able to have direct conversations about the impact of accessibility on the rest of the team and the rest of the system. So, and then I think moving forward to say, like, how is that impact on square footage? When you're able to really understand and do that tedious task of like the who's and the how's and how are we going to do this, right? Knowing who works together, what assignments are cross departmental, how do we again make a structure around the timing of when everybody should be together? Is it better that it's in a silo and that it's a department, or is it better because you need a project team available during that hybrid week? So that's going to take on an organic solution dependent to each organization. With pertaining to square footage, I don't know that there's a specific answer to say it's going to cut your square footage by 1/3 or 1/2. Truly, in the idea of space planning, you're working off of data-driven specific from an organization to say then, okay, if I apply that to space, I know I need this much square footage to accomplish this, that, and the other thing. You're going to estimate you're going to have 50% of your staff on any day, and that's really how a solid approach to be able to move forward with any sort of real estate planning.
There's another school of thought, though, is that with social distancing, even if you have 50% of the workers, you're going to need the same amount of space because they'll have twice as much social distancing space. So I think the jury's probably still out in terms of how it's going to settle down. But on the HR side of things, so this is one of those landmines that because you've got mental health issues and the psychological challenges of I can't come in, I'm afraid to, or maybe I can't come in because I'm a caregiver for my elderly parents who I'm living with, and I feel like I'm kind of being left behind. I'm being discriminated against. What are some areas and things that employers can do, Brittany, that can mitigate some of that again?
Yeah. So in terms of, how we can bring, if we're going to, cohort employees, if that's the choice, you just want to make sure you're not doing that. You might be doing it in terms of departments or in terms of whether it's preference, whatever it is, as long as you're not doing it along the lines of protected classes. So Monday, Wednesday, men come in, Tuesday, Thursday, women come in, or everyone can come in unless you're older than 65 because we're still nervous for you. Like those are not going to be acceptable, and you're going to run afoul of anti-discrimination laws. If you choose to stagger by department, that is going to be, a business-based decision that is what makes the most sense for you, to have teams in the office together to complete their work. And then in terms of within those cohorts, once you have them, if you have individuals who say, I see what you're doing, but I'm still too nervous, I'm not coming in. There's a limited right to refuse work under the Occupational Safety and Health Act, but if you have protocols in place to make your workplace safe and reduce the risk, yeah, the risk might not be gone, but no one's ever expected you to reduce the risk to zero. Then those employees don't have a good faith reason to stay home. Might they still call OSHA on you? They might, and you will have to deal with that, but then you can present to them, all of the procedures and protocols you have put in place to keep employees safe. And some of that may be, if you have kind of done a temperature check on vaccination rates, that, we're at 75% vaccinated. We still have procedures in place, but, it is a relatively low risk workplace.
Could you separate them by personality type? There's there's DISC, there's a lot of different personality types. There's one that has come out recently, Pat Lencioni and the Table Group. It's called the Working Genius. And there's 5 or 6: wonder, invention, discernment, galvanizing, enablement, and tenacity. And some of those might fit into the innovation, into Becky's innovation and creativity area. So all the innovators and creatives come in on Monday and Tuesday. All the task doers come in on Wednesday and Thursday. Could you set it up that way?
From a legal standpoint, I might want to see how that pans out. I don't know anything about this particular kind of way of categorizing people's personalities. I think you would definitely want to look at how that happens to group people once it's done.
Yeah, there's strengths finders. Everybody has their different strengths and weaknesses, and yeah, I was interested to hear that. So, so implementing a hybrid environment, Becky, how long is something like that going to take? And Brittany too, if you can weigh in on that.
Yeah. So it's going to vary, every organization's propensity for how much change they need to make, or little change they need to make, just by nature of who they are. But I would say if you really get into the Hello Hybrid, again, it is a playbook you can use to kind of say, okay, we need to work on all of these, all of these constructs as far as trust and AV, and we have lots of things to tackle. It might take 3 months of planning, for the team to get through it. And then, several more months for implementation. It might take only a month of planning. You're able to set aside enough time to get to a solid game plan that you can make action on. And then, months relative. Short months to 2, 3, 4, 5 months, depending on, what kind of physical changes, AV changes. So if you're looking to come back on June 1 and you've not addressed any of these things, I hate to break it to you, you might be behind the 8 ball. But if you're looking to come back in the fall and you've got to jump on this and you've got some good data going, it certainly is in your wheelhouse to just kind of keep moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think a lot of this depends on where you're starting from and where you're looking to go. If you're totally remote and you're looking to go back into the workplace, you might have a lot of work to do to kind of get your workplace up to where it needs to be. But if you're already kind of doing somewhat of a hybrid program and you're just looking to formalize it and make it permanent, there's definitely potentially less steps that you need to do.
And there's certainly a lot of essential employers that have been open for a long time that have made it work. But I think if you could talk about the word intentional as we kind of wind down here, that seems to be the most important takeaway that I got from this, no matter what area of this you're looking at. Could you reflect on that again and really hit on some of those key points that some of the attendees can take away from this? Either one of you.
I'm happy to go first. I think just from a legal risk standpoint, you want to be intentional in that you have a plan, you are assessing all the pros and cons of that plan, and to the extent there are legal risks, that you are minimizing them or you're getting ahead of them. And just from a workplace safety standpoint, being intentional shows your employees that, we want you to come back to the workplace. We think it's best for everyone, but we're committed to doing it in a safe way. We're having open lines of communication. And I think that is where being intentional really becomes key, you know, making employees confident that this makes sense.
Yeah, and in our world of planning and design, nothing happens by happenstance. Your culture doesn't even happen by happenstance. Something is intentionally happening. And so if you look at design and planning and the way you implement business, it is always intentional. You're building on, you know, what you understand to be your truths, and you're defining solutions and what needs to be solved to come up with a great, and in my world, workplace, right, to solve for what you're trying to be intentional in business. So really having the intentional thought about your business match with the intentional workplace and what you're expecting out of your employees, that in my world is where we live. Like understanding each organization and moving forward with intention is a huge part of success.
Brittany, this might come up with some of your clients in conversations. It has, ever since this pandemic started, vaccine requirements for travel. What are you seeing risks and issues that might have to do with that, with employees and employer requirements? And it might have to do with whether they're vaccinated or not. But
yeah, travel has been one of those things that CDC has kind of changed their tune on throughout the pandemic, but definitely making sure your travel policy complies with that. So if you have employees that are not vaccinated, CDC is recommending, this is kind of more aggressive than they had been, that those employees do stay home and do get a COVID-19 test, and they're home for at least a week. With vaccinated employees, that is not required. And so then you also just need to assess how your business travel may impact vaccinated or unvaccinated employees. So just making sure that you kind of understand that if you're, you know, requiring certain employees to travel that are not vaccinated, you know, then you need to assess, you know, their quarantine requirements that may come up after that.
and if something happens and they get the virus, who's liable for that?
It may be a workers' compensation issue. Yeah, they're, you know, on the job. So whether they are home, whether they are traveling for business, you know, those all may tie back to workers' compensation. So it's a good point, Dan.
Yeah, interesting. Can you, if you can ask somebody if they've gotten their vaccine, can you also then force them to show you their card?
Yes.
Okay, somebody had asked that as well. And I'm sure nobody will ever forge one of those cards. They're pretty easy to duplicate, but we won't go there. I guess we would go there. What if they did not get the vaccine and they said that they did and showed you a card as an employer? I would imagine the liability's on them.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a falsification issue,
Yeah.
you know, likely under your handbook. It would be like they falsified a time card or any other document that they're falsifying to you. And so that would be grounds for discipline, you know, up into potentially including termination. You know, do some due diligence in confirming that it is falsified. But, you know, they do tend to have like a sticker on them. So if you just make a copy, it might not have that.
Sounds good. Well, final thoughts. Becky, you go first.
Oh man, you were really spot on, Dan, with intention. You know,
Okay, that's good. That's fine.
facing the future with intention at this point, right? We have just a litany of information available to us, and it's a really exciting time. So being able to move forward with our business in an exciting way and with intention and planning for the future of work in my world is a ton of fun. So that's my parting words.
What I'm thinking is that this is probably the most difficult time to be an employer because there are so few employees available. There's the workforce is small. There's a math challenge, as we've been hearing, and because of all these variables and the importance of how to be more accountable and productive and creative and collaborative, there's so many more moving parts that it seems it's more complicated now than it ever was. I might be imagining things, but
no, in many ways, yeah.
And so maybe those personality profiles or assessments to see how the fit is, you know, before COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID, to see if that individual is still the right fit for a department or a company might be interesting. Brittany, how about you? Final thought.
Final thought is to, you know, do the planning ahead of time. Everyone is exhausted, especially your, HR and management teams. Things have been changing so much, and everyone has had to adapt, but hopefully we're getting closer to kind of a post-pandemic world. And I guess look for the positives that you've taken from this. Are your employees happy with having a little bit more flexibility? And maybe people will be excited to be back in the office and seeing each other. But as always, just keep an eye out for these potential issues and reach out if you need help.
Great. Well, on that note, thank you very much. This concludes our webcast. Thank you to our presenters and partners, Rebecca Brown, Vice President with Creative Business Interiors, and Brittany Lopez-Nallet, shareholder with Reinhardt, Berner Van Buren. So these are the experts. You'll find their contact information on that prior slide or this slide. They're happy to help you regarding issues related to getting your employees back to the office safely and establish an actual plan to accommodate all the forms of work in this new post-pandemic era. And it is a field of landmines. As I mentioned earlier, the webcast is, the recording will be available on the website by tomorrow morning, and the slide deck is available now. We do value your feedback, and we look to have more webcasts like this in the future. So we would appreciate if you fill out the attendee survey, which will open in a new tab once you close the webcast tab in your browser. So thank you so much on behalf of our webcast presenters and partners, Creative Business Interiors and Reinhardt, and BT360 Content Solutions, the marketing storytelling arm of BizTimes Media. Thanks again for attending. Enjoy the rest of this beautiful day. I don't know if the Brewers won, but let's hope they continue winning. So thanks everybody for attending, and have a great rest of the day.